Kwanza tunapasua hii zaidi.
Akakujia kamera yangu.
Lakini sasa tulishangaa mbona tunavamiwa, hata tujaulizwa nyinyi ni wakina nani.
World Press Freedom Day is a key annual event in the calendar of the media worldwide. It is a day for us and those who cherish the freedom of the press to celebrate independent journalism and its contribution to the advancement of society, even as we reflect on the challenges journalists and media institutions face in the changing socio-political and economic environment.
The World Press Freedom Day is very important for us as journalists because it's time to really take stock of our profession, looking at the achievements, the opportunities, and the challenges. So in Kenya, we are looking at it as a day when we really have to reflect on the things that are coming in the way of independent journalism. And we have had a number of discussions. But I think what stands out for us more is the whole sustainability question and the fact that advertisers, including government, using their resources, the fact that they know that the media depends on them for advertising, to demand that the media does certain things and to almost hold the media ransom. That is a big issue for Kenyan media, and it is a question of discussion going forward. And another big thing is the whole idea of ethical journalism, which is a very internal issue, a very personal issue. And I think on a day like this, it would be important that journalists rethink their role in society and recommit themselves, because even as much as we clamor for freedom, that freedom has to come with personal responsibility.
World Press Freedom Day is a global event. It is a day for us as media to reflect on what we do, how we do it, and the challenges we face. It is also a chance for us to try and educate our audiences on what the media is all about and the challenges it faces. And one thing I think we need to keep constantly pointing out is that when you fight for freedom of the media, it is not about the media. It is actually about the freedom of our audiences, our readers, our viewers, to get information, to read what they need to read, to view what they need to read without government censorship or any other blockages.
I think it is every journalist celebrates this day because it is a day set aside by the world to acknowledge the important work of journalism and the work played by the press in advancing democracy and actualization of all the other rights that are germane to human beings. It's fundamental to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it's entrenched in many constitutions around the world. Because the press or the media generally is the avenue through which people or citizens get to exercise their rights, especially the freedom of speech. So we as journalists, of course, carry the bigger burden of delivering that responsibility to the public. And our welfare and the performance of this duty is critical to the advancement of democracy and the welfare of society. So we need to celebrate it. And we need society to be involved, not just us journalists celebrating it, but it needs to be a societal function that everybody commemorates and celebrates the function and phenomenon of journalism.
From 1990, where are we today in terms of media freedom space? In Kenya in particular, obviously there has been a revolution, so to speak. A revolution in terms of the number, the growth, explosive growth of the media, particularly on the broadcast side. And then of course there is also the digital space. Then there is the issue of media freedom. I think today we enjoy more freedom than we have ever enjoyed in the past. And I think when I look at all other countries in the region and across Africa, and I think even if you go to South America and Asia and other places, I think we must rank very high in terms of media freedom. But that does not mean we have everything we need. There are still challenges. We still find the government being very obstructionist on some things, on some media freedom laws, trying to claw back some of the gains we have made. If not the government, you will find county governments are a big challenge now in terms of having no respect for media freedom and for journalists. You will find individual officials, policemen, police chiefs, county governors, members of parliament, and so on, who are still out to keep the media in check, or to repress the media, or to go out after individual journalists. So this is a battle that we have not yet won it. We are still fighting to secure that space.
If you compared the number of incidents in 2017 and 2018, they were on the rise. After the handshake, they've come down from 74 to 53, which begins to tell you that our political environment is a big player, is a driver on cases of violence against journalists. And you'd see, yes, a number of the assailants were state officers, but also political goons, people who follow certain politicians. So the issue that politicians have not come out to denounce attacks is perhaps the biggest challenge in town. So in closed spaces, they are able to tell us we support media freedom, we support media houses. But in the field out there, you tend to hear senior politicians saying this media house is against us. And that is a precursor to attacks that would face journalists. So one of the things we are going to be asking for is all political parties and senior politicians making an undertaking in public that they will denounce attacks and they will hold their own members or supporters to account whenever they attack journalists.
I will attribute number one that on to impunity and the slow pace at which attackers or perpetrators of attacks against journalists, even when identified, justice takes very slow to come. That way, most of these attackers and perpetrators of these attacks are more emboldened to do this again and again. Secondly is that there is an increment, you can call it an outbreak of media out there. I mean, less than 8 years ago we had say 30 radios. Now we have 180 thereabouts. That is more than a six-fold increase. So then the attackers therefore have more people to attack. That means then there is the devolution. We have more community-based radios, and there is less legal framework and institutional framework for the protection mechanisms. So ideally, I would say that now we have many more media outlets, many more media practitioners, and therefore the attackers who are emboldened by the impunity I said have more people to attack, and especially when we have cases of access to justice in far-flung areas, that impunity now has led to those increased attacks.
What we do at the council is we have a desk that handles issues of safety of journalists, and it's manned by the Press Freedom and Ethics Manager. And a part of what we do is we keep a database of press freedom violations. this database is important to us and in fact to the industry, because we are able to receive reports from the field, from stakeholders, from journalists themselves who feel that they are under threat. And once we receive these reports, then we have to even gather more information so that we are able to respond appropriately to the threats, and to ensure that the reporting mechanism is efficient and effective. We have set up a system to enable us not only receive these reports, but monitor and track these cases from the time they happen to conclusion. Now, we have, I'll start by telling you about the hotline that we have at the Media Council of Kenya, which is 0702 222 111. And once you call this number, it's manned, it's alive 24/7 at any time of the day. Any journalist who feels that they are under threat, or anyone who has observed a violation of press freedom going on somewhere, they can report to us, and that is if we have not been brought to attention to it, because we are always on alert. We also have an email address, safety@mediacouncil.or.ke, where reports also come directly to. And as we speak, we are in the process of setting up an online system, which we will then eventually link to the line and the email, that helps us to track these violations and even map out hotspots where these violations take place.
So Article 19 Eastern Africa is doing three things around the issue of dealing with impunity against journalists. We organize that work in protection. We also organize the work around prevention. And the third part is about prosecution. So within prevention, we monitor the incidents to understand sources of the threats, type of the threats, and how prepared media houses and journalists are in mitigating those threats whenever they happen. In terms of protection, we train journalists in safety skills, also help them developing safety protocols within the media houses or individuals, and build solidarity networks with a number of other organizations, so that there are emergency funds for those who need them, but there are also plans on how to hold each other up whenever those attacks happen, because sometimes they can be fatal. So people would know that Francis Nyaruri was killed some years back, and there's been no sufficient redress on that killing. We also had an incident where John Kitui was killed in Eldoret as an editor, and this begins to say that correspondents or editors can be vulnerable. So it's not that the lower you are, the harsher the situation would be. Anyone who is working, whether on sports or politics, or sometimes environment, all journalists can be vulnerable. So thinking and helping them to think through this process, because in other countries, journalism is not a crime, but in our space, journalism is increasingly criminalized, both by law, but also by people's perception. People want to lynch a suspect, and they don't want a journalist to record. And that is always problematic in the country. So that's how we organize our work. And we are here today purely to help reiterate those three things. And as members of the Kenya Media Sector Working Group, we lead on the safety part, but we are also co-chairs of the legal part, where we are trying to challenge the laws that are problematic, so that journalists can be able to operate in a free environment.
Of course, as a media regulator, we also bring together stakeholders in the industry, because the issue of safety of journalists cannot be handled by one organ or an institution, so to speak. So we have partners that we really must work with to ensure that this project succeeds. And apart from the journalists themselves, we have stakeholders in government, because government is one of the largest or if not the largest source of information and a subject of news. And this government also helps in bringing to justice the perpetrators of attacks against journalists. So we have police, we have the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, because then if we have a violation of against press freedom, which is be it an attack, an assault or a threat, it has to be reported to the police, who then have to follow up, investigate and bring the case to court. So then without their support, it is difficult for this project to succeed, and we recognize that, and that is why we have brought together stakeholders and at the Kenya Media Sector Working Group to ensure that the issues that we have and the role that they have to play in this process, which is critical, is tapped, so that then we can move forward. And as we speak, there are discussions which are on a very advanced stage to set up a national mechanism for safety and protection of journalists. And in that mechanism, there are a wide range of interests and of course related to the safety of journalists. In that group we have donors, development partners, we have civil society organizations who have been involved in issues of protection of journalists, such as Article 19, we have IREX, we have the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, we have the Office of the Inspector General, and they have been very cooperative, and so far they have even promised to set up a desk that will be in charge of receiving these cases that come directly, because if then they are lumped together with that other cases, they might take longer for justice to take place or even forgotten.
Going back to 2007, the genesis of the post-election violence, of course the genesis of, again, the ICC cases, looking at how we conducted ourselves as journalists, I think that was the biggest failure from our side, because we forgot that we were journalists and decided to take sides. So a lot of us journalists were affiliated to various political divisions, such that even when the ICC cases started years after, that was around 2009, still were not able to shake off the political tags, the tribalism tags, and all this went into our reporting. We're not able to look at the ICC cases objectively, and most of the time we looked at the stories more about the accused persons, such that the journalists who went out of their way to try and look at the story from all sides, we found ourselves in deep problems. Anytime you went to speak to the survivors and the victims, you always seen like somebody who was working either for the prosecution or working for the victims, or somebody who was saying people have to go to jail. And some of us really went through rough times. Some of us had this bad experience of from time to time getting phone calls, being asked, oh, why did you write this story? What did you mean in this story? And there were a lot of intimidations, there were a lot of threats, and in a way you are not able to execute your duties well when you know when you're writing a story that people of very high status will read such a story. And of course, if again you look at the story of the ICC, you can imagine what came out as hate speech. And the worst part of it was that journalists were actually the ones using hate speech on radio, and we can see how we contributed to the violence that came about after the elections. And I think as journalists, sometimes it's good to always shake off this politics, shake off the tribes, because we are supposed to be the watchdog of the society. We are supposed to be there for the service of every person, not the service of our tribes, not the service of our political parties.
When we are not living up to our calling, when as journalists we are taking bribes or affiliating ourselves with ethnic or political causes or acting as agents of political parties, then we are betraying what we have fought for, and then we are also contributing to events that then come to limit our freedom. Because if I forget that I am a journalist and become a political campaigner, then I become a target, not as a journalist, but as a political campaigner. But when I then turn around and say I'm being attacked because I'm a journalist, it's not helping. So I think in that way we reduce our level of freedom. We saw during the last elections in Kenya a very sad scenario where some editors, media owners, media company CEOs contributed to what I call castrating themselves. They went and conspired with a political formation to suppress news, to block live coverage of a very important political event. That was a very, very big betrayal. And once we start going that way, then all the gains we've made over the last few years can be wiped out in a few minutes.
As a journalist, I always hold myself as a messenger, as a custodian of public good. Occasionally, in the performance of that duty, you'll find incursions into your space or into your ability to perform that function. And so we have to protect it. And hence, occasions such as the World Press Freedom Day, when we take stock of what has happened to us as well as society and see how we have advanced our mandate as media. They say your rights, the defense of your rights, you first defend your rights before you defend the rights of others, because otherwise yours will be extinguished. You will not even be in a position to defend or promote other rights. So it's crucial that journalists in the performance of their work are careful to perform their work in a manner that society approves of, and two, that does not expose them to undue danger. So it's both a personal responsibility as a journalist as well as a communal responsibility to ensure that a journalist is safe in practicing his craft.
True, that is the case, but I think we are being foolhardy to start blaming universities and colleges for making journalists for us. They won't manage. I mean, we have not had banks blaming universities for not bringing out good bankers, or neither have we had the schools of medicine for not doing that. It's simply a link between academia and industry that we lack. We don't entirely train people to feed the job market. We train people to open their minds so they can have a real understanding, because you may have the best curricula out in the university now and you have a new set of equipment needed tomorrow. So the newsroom and the softwares and all that changes. Then you revise, you cannot keep revising a curricula every month and all that. So what we need is that for the training program to end, you combine that academic knowledge and practical experience in real newsrooms. And that is done in medical school, here we a bit of law and all that. That before you qualify, you must operate in a practical environment. It's what we have is a mess where people go, learn journalism, and graduate without ever stepping into a newsroom or into a media environment. So it's not really academic, it's the ecosystem of training and preparing journalists has hiccups and it has very many gaps that need to be said, such that, because all serious professions, you cannot start your training in college or university and get certification without having experienced that practical part. This practical thing will not be done in the lecture hall. It has to be done in a practical newsroom. And it isn't about you opening a little media outlet near the college or beside the college for training. It's about people coming out of college and getting into the existing media houses to see what happens there. I mean, when you're training lawyers, the lawyers don't open their little practice beside the school. They come and are attached to pupillage in a law firm, so that then they can go out and become lawyers. In medicine, you must be attached in an existing hospital for you to become a nurse or hospital or doctor. So really, it's a straightforward thing.
Last year, the Council for Legal Education, if I may deviate a bit just using it as a comparison, they reported that out of the people who are the law students who did the bar exam, only 28% passed, 72% failed. So you see, there's an empirical measure of, are we producing mediocres, are we producing people who can do the job, and so on. But in our case, which threshold or which measure are we using to say that we are producing substandard journalists? I can, from the top of my head, pick very, very well performing people who have been passed through our schools. However, allow me to say that in every institution, there is a normal curve. There are good products, there are average products, and there are poor products. So we cannot use the poor products as a yardstick for measuring the quality of education in institutions.
I believe as journalists, we really have that demand for us to remain professional, for us to remain objective, and for us to be ethical, because it's an issue of unethical decisions. And even as we talk about press freedom today, we've seen the kind of statistics that have been presented to us. The press freedom in Kenya is on the decline. And you can see challenges are coming from all sides, from the devolution, from the national government, from even the public. And I think the question for us in the media is to start asking ourselves, how do we move from here? Are there things that we can prevent on our own as journalists? Because I know, yes, a lot of things have to be done by the security organs, but even us, we have to start looking at ourselves, starting looking at inside where we work, inside our, asking ourselves, have we been ethical? Have we been professional? And I can give you instances, especially when you talk about brown envelope journalism. This is a major problem that we have to deal with. And for as long as we have that tag of journalists who can be bribed, it will be very hard for us to be free. And the reason why I mean it will be hard for us to be free is because we've already lowered our dignity. We've already lowered our professionalism, such that people look at you like a nobody, and that is why it's easy for members of the public to start giving you names like Githeri Media. All these names are coming because I believe there's something that we can do within ourselves to try and change. I know, of course, there's a lot to do that other stakeholders, including the government, can do, but I also think we have our own part to play.
We need to emphasize on the need to remain on the straight path of journalism. Because of the changes in society, social media and so forth, we've seen journalists dabbling in other forms of communication that are not strictly speaking journalism. And therefore, they deprive themselves of the protections that are available to journalists. So some of the attacks that journalists have suffered are because they dabbled in non-professional things or unprofessional things. I have seen journalists who are running WhatsApp and other social media groups. And on those platforms, they are not distinguishing themselves as journalists. They're just part of the public. And when you venture into that territory, then you actually have lost the protections that come with being a journalist and what society owes you.
Journalists are sometimes being hired to do what would be largely mark cleaning or PR exercises for county officials, whether the executive or county assembly members. And whenever now a negative story comes out, they are in this conflict of interest situation, because you, at one point, you are the one helping them clean up their image, and now on this other side, you are the one who has written what is considered as a negative story. So one, there is need to train journalists on media ethics and tell them that objectivity and minimum expectations of journalists would require that they cannot be in the same bed with their sources or subjects and still be able to write a good story. So there is need for retraining and enforcement of codes of conduct at that level. But there is also need to push back the sources in the name of county executives or county assembly members, so that there is a sufficient professional distance between those two.
Advertisers wanting to influence editorial decisions, while it's unethical, it's not entirely illegal. So it is, I am putting money for an advert, you cannot run a bad story about me. The old saying about a Chinese wall between commercials and editorial must be there, such that if you have gotten an advert from somebody, you don't allow them then to influence what goes into your editorial piece.
As an industry, we stepped back and re-examined ourselves. To what extent are we exposing ourselves by being reliant on just a few bigger advertisers? Can we develop alternative business models that free us from that trap? We need to look at things that way now.
So growth in the media is very, very slow, even for my male colleagues. But that does not excuse the fact that there are no women in the media. in some media houses, women are virtually absent in leadership positions because society requires equal representation. I always see this as a matter of fairness. It's a question of fairness in society, and we need representation by both men and women in all spheres, in politics, in education, in academia, and in the media as well. But for the media, it's particularly more important to have women because the media sets the agenda for a country, for a society, and men and women view things in very different ways. Men have a different perception to women. So when you have only men making decisions in the media, it means you are actually feeding society on a one-sided perception. You are leaving out another side of the perception. And that's why it's very, very important that you have representation of both men and women. For my female colleagues in media, I would just want to say that it is not a fast thing. Nobody is going to fast track you because you're a woman. So you have to work just as hard as your male colleagues. You have to put in the hours, you have to put in the days, the months, and the years. And you have to compete. When there's a position, it's your work that should speak for you. In media houses where professionalism is respected, it shouldn't matter whether it's a man or a woman getting appointed. It should be based on their professionalism. And so even for the women, they should know that they have to be professional, they have to work hard, and their work has to speak for them.
The Kenya Media Complaints Commission exists as a statutory mechanism to help resolve disputes. And this is expected in any country where there is rule of law and democracy. So I begin by detesting the fact that a member of parliament can totally disregard law that was made by themselves and decide to either publicly besmirch a journalist. So what I would expect for any member who may feel aggrieved by journalists, or journalists who may feel aggrieved by members of public, that first you easily just need to fill a simple form that is stating the nature of the aggression or breach that has happened, and within a day or two there will be a process where the registrar of the Complaints Commission will come back to you in the event that they need more details about the incident, and once that is done, there is a kind of an order of hearing those cases. There are cases that can be mediated so that there is no need of hearing. It's just to make the two parties understand each other and begin to correct where there was a mistake. And we've done a number of those. Then there are others that would require a full hearing. So the commissioners will sit and hear both parties and make a decision.
We have managed to dispose of many cases. Some of them have been disposed of at preliminary stage, where we find that the Commission does not even have the mandate to hear those matters. Others have been disposed of through mediation, which is part of our work. The others have been dismissed. And the others are, as we speak now, I think the matters that are there, which are pending adjudication, are only 9.
I think the first thing that we need to do is mentorship. Like you realize, a lot of good journalists have left the media. We have some who have left because they are older, and we have others who have left to pursue other interests, owing it to some of the challenges that exist. But I think we need to come up with a program where we can mentor the new journalists that are coming to ensure that some sanity has been restored in this career, so that the terminologies like Githeri media, the brown envelope journalism, at least we can push these things away, and then we can be left now to tackle the policy part of it and the law part of it.
The media has a duty to continue covering public interest issues, and if politics is going to be the public interest issue at that time, it ought not be relegated until campaigns are declared. So let's learn that public interest is an ongoing and a shifting goalpost, and whenever it is important, and using the news values as journalists, let them be able to make that judgment call without third parties who are not professionals determining what the media ought to be covering.
Kenya has a very responsible and a very professional media. Weighed against other African countries in the region and beyond, we are probably way ahead. But we are not there yet. We are not where we need to be. There is still a lot of people in journalism who really need better training. We are talking about both professional training in terms of the way they write, or the way they shoot movies, scripts, the way they broadcast their news and package it and produce it. There is need for great improvement. There is great need for improvement. There is, of course, also great need for improvement on the ethical side. And that is where things like the Kenya Editors Guild, working with the Media Council of Kenya, with the Kenya Union of Journalists, with the Kenya Correspondents Association, with all the media associations, need to work together to make sure that professionalism is upheld and improved.
From where I sit, I'm confident that before the end of this year, we'll be able to firm up the discussions that we're having with the stakeholders so that we can set up a national mechanism for protection and safety of journalists in Kenya.